this is Rebecca with RL Designs. Today is one of the most important tutorials that we're going to be talking about because we're going to talk about the reasons that people quit sewing before they really even start. This is a reason that I almost quit sewing myself, and I've heard it from countless others who don't know what to do. And the reason is the thread has jammed in your machine. So I have figured out 5 ways to figure out why there is a jam in your machine before you start fooling with the dials of the tension and things like that. So we're going to talk about how to figure out why the thread in your machine is jammed up. So the first thing that you want to do, you should go in order by what I'm telling you right now. The first thing that you want to do is you're going to check that your thread from the top of the machine is threaded correctly. So I take my thread out and I start again at the beginning. I open up my manual and I figure out, did I do this correctly? I've talked about this in the threading video and also the bobbin video, but one reason that threads jam is because the spool of thread is on upside down. If it is on upside down, you can tell that my thread is coming from the back of the spool. That's actually upside down for my machine. So I flip it over and try that. So then I will go through and I will thread the whole machine again, make sure that I've done it correctly. So then you get your scrap of fabric, put it in there and try to sew again. Well, it's jammed again. So let's try something else. So it wasn't the threading. So let's go down, and it wasn't the top threading, but it might be the bobbin. So let's take the bobbin out. And number 1, look at your bobbin. Does it look like the thread is on evenly? When I first started sewing, I didn't realize that I was threading my bobbin incorrectly, and there was a lot of thread on the top and not very much on the bottom. So that when it was unwinding in my machine, it was actually kind of moving the entire mechanism, and it would jam up every single time. So if it looks like it's been wound correctly, let's now take the bobbin and put it back in the machine. Now, if you'll notice, I'm putting the bobbin in so the thread is going clockwise. However, if you look at the diagram on my machine, it says to make sure that the thread is going counterclockwise. So the way that we change that is just what we did with the spool. We turn it upside down. So maybe that was your problem, that the bobbin was actually upside down. So once we have figured that out, okay, it's wound correctly, and I have placed it in the correct direction. I'm going to put the bobbin in where it's supposed to go. So now let's get our scrap material and let's try it again. So that might be the problem. Well, it jams again. So now what do you do? And I've had this happen countless times where I've had to go through these steps to figure out what I've done wrong. So we've done the thread on the top, we've done the bottom, we've looked at the bobbin and made sure that it is correctly wound, and it looks correct, but we just did it again, and maybe we actually didn't do the correct bobbin. So what I'll do is I'll again take the bobbin out, I'll take all the thread out. I know I'm wasting it, but in the long run it might be worth it. You could just get another bobbin, and I'll go through all the steps and I'll make sure, did I wind the bobbin correctly? So I'll go back up here and I'll look and I'll see, well, this is the way that my thread is supposed to go on the bobbin, where it goes around counterclockwise, this little dial, and then comes back out. Well, maybe I put it on clockwise, and maybe that was the problem. So then I will rethread my bobbin, stick it back in the machine, try it again. Your machine is still jamming. At this point, you may be very frustrated. I advise you to walk away. Walk away, because if you get too frustrated with your machine, you are apt to just throw it on the ground and never want to deal with it again. But I'm telling you, it is worth it. So walk away, cool down, give yourself a break, and then come back and try a couple more of these tips to figure out what's wrong. The other thing to check, now that we've threaded everything, we've threaded the bobbin, we've put it back in the machine, it's still jamming up, there's something else to look for. And that is, does the thread on the top of the machine match the thread that you put in the bobbin? If they are 2 different thicknesses of thread, that might be your problem. Now, when you get into higher sewing techniques where you're doing things like quilting and decorative sewing on beautiful things that you're making, purses and whatnot, then you can talk about changing the width of the thread. But at this point, the thread needs to be the same. I even went so far as to saying when you're beginning, it should be the same color off the same spool. I wouldn't do a black thread and a white thread down here when I first started, because sometimes there's minute differences in the threads. So I make sure that everything is the same. At this point, put everything back in. You now have everything that I've done and you've talked about, and you still can't figure out the problem. The last thing that I would say to do before you really start tearing the machine apart to find out if there are actually any unworking parts is the tension dial up here. And sometimes the tension dial will be on the side. Now I say this last because one of the mistakes that beginning people who are sewing make is to start fooling with this tension dial at the beginning. They start moving it, trying to figure out what's wrong. When you do that and you haven't gone through all the other steps, it's just going to mess everything up further. You want the tension to be correct so that the stitches on the top look exactly as the stitches on the bottom. If they look exactly the same, you can't tell the top of the fabric from the bottom of the fabric, then everything's working correctly and the tension is right. But when you get into fooling with the tension dials before you've done all these other steps, it can really make things very, very difficult. Once you have fooled with the tension dials, it may be that that was your problem and you've done everything else, but now we're up to the tension. Just try it. Go all the way to 5. See what that looks like. Go down to 1. See what that looks like. Try to really figure out if the tension is the issue. If the tension's not the issue, there may be a problem with the mechanics of your machine. I did have that happen once where the area that was supposed to hold the bobbin in one of my older machines was actually loose, and it was moving every time I pushed my foot pedal. And I figured out that that probably was not supposed to be the case. So I had to come in and get my get some tools and try to figure out how to do that. And I was able to fix it without taking it to a person who knew more about machines than I did, which at that point would have been anybody. So once you've gone through all these steps, I hope that you'll be able to figure out the reason why you're having jams in your machine, because there is a reason. The last tip, once you've figured out the cause and then the effect of having jams in your machine, you need to take your manual or a notebook and write down what you figured out. If it was because you had the thread coming off the front instead of the back or vice versa, you write that down and you circle it and you star it in your manual, because then you will never make that mistake again. So then when you go back and you get a jam later, then you can realize, no, it's not because I threaded it incorrectly, it's probably another solution. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope it encourages you to keep trying to sew, because I promise you it is worth it. Make sure to subscribe to this channel below and like RL Designs on Facebook.